Hey everybody, we're going to get started here in just a couple minutes, but do want to test that audio is working. So if you do hear me, please type yes either into the Q&A box or the chat. All right, we do have confirmation that audio is working, so we will get started here in a couple minutes. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, just a couple of the normal reminders. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. You can type those in by clicking the Q&A or chat section in the lower portion of your control panel. Feel free to chat between yourselves as well throughout. We will be posting a recording of the webinar on our blog. The link for that will be shown at the end. And if you'd like a PDF copy of the presentation, there will be a link to download that on that same post as the recording. If your question does not get answered today or you think of any others, please email our support inbox, which will be shown at the end as well. All right, so what is on the agenda for today? Protein. This is a popular and pretty big topic in the health and wellness world and really always has been. I have Coach Libby with me today, and she's going to give you lots of great information. She's going to start with just the basics of what protein is and the benefits it has for your body. And then she'll go over some of the common and also lesser known sources. And then she'll cover some of the hot topics that normally surround the protein discussion. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Coach Libby.
Thank you, Shelby. I am very excited to be leading this webinar. As Shelby mentioned, we will be talking all about proteins today. But before we get too into detail, let's go back to the basics. What is a protein? Proteins are what many refer to as the building blocks of the body. This is because of the huge role they play in our tissues, muscles, and structures, which we will go into later on in this webinar. A quick PSA, we will not be going into huge chemical, biological details like a college science class. We will be focusing on the simple main points to not confuse anyone. Our goal is to help you understand. Proteins are one of the 3 macronutrients our body needs. The other 2 being carbohydrates or carbs, and lipids, also more commonly known as fats. Protein is a micronutrient due to the amount needed in our body. It is needed in a greater amount, so that is why it counts as a macronutrient and not a micronutrient. Proteins are complex molecules made up of amino acids. Amino acids are organic compounds. Proteins are basically long chains of amino acids. Depending on the combination and arrangement of amino acids, they create certain proteins, like arranging the individual numbers 2, 7, and 4 to create 472 or 247. There are 20 amino acids. 9 of those amino acids our bodies don't make. Therefore, the only sources we have of them is external, aka food and drinks. This is why they are called essential amino acids, because it is essential for us to get them in since our body does not make them, which is one reason why protein has such a valuable component to nutrition. This leads into what proteins do. You might hear all the time to make sure you get enough protein. Now we will dive into why we need it and what makes it so important. Protein does the incredible job of providing structure. They provide structure and support to cells like muscles. Proteins help with muscle growth and repair and prevent muscle loss. Going off of that, protein can help with bone health, helping keeping those bones nice and strong. Proteins are also like text messages in our body. Now that may sound strange, but certain proteins are messengers. They help carry and transmit signals to cells, which help carry out many bodily processes we need. Proteins can also be categorized as enzymes and help digest food. With that, protein can help with regulating blood sugar. They do this when they help keep us full and satisfied longer. And by keeping us full and satisfied longer, they can also be an aid in weight loss. A protein intake of 30% of your total daily caloric intake can help boost metabolism and reduce caloric intake and cause weight loss. Protein can also be very beneficial in pregnancy and tissue development and growth. Proteins can act as antibodies. These proteins can help fight disease by circulating in the blood and attaching to antigens or a toxin or foreign substance and neutralizing them. Now onto the burning question many of you may have now that we covered what proteins are and what they do. How much protein do we need? What is the recommended intake of protein? A general recommendation is 0.7 grams of protein to 1 pound of body fat. Let's use an example of someone who weighs 100 pounds. Take 0.7 times 100 and get 70 grams of protein. Usually a minimum of 20 grams of protein per meal is recommended as a starting guideline. Now, everyone is different, so depending on the person and their specific situation, the protein need can change. Age, activity level, and body weight are main things to think about when considering daily amount of protein. For instance, our body does not use protein as efficiently with age. So someone who is elderly may need more protein than a 30-year-old. The same goes for babies, toddlers, and kids as they are growing and developing, which protein plays a key part in. Someone who is pregnant or breastfeeding needs more protein to help get enough protein for her and the baby. Recovering from an illness as your body heals and fighting off disease is another sign to need more protein. And those suffering with an eating disorder that are malnourished. And lastly, a huge one, and that is athletes. Athletes have a higher protein requirement due to all the physical strain that they are doing. And of course, if you are vegetarian or vegan, it is important to monitor or be mindful of how much protein you are getting in and that you are getting in enough. Now armed with roughly how much protein you should get, we will look into sources of protein. To start, let's cover the most thought of protein source. That is meat. Meat is typically the first thing people think of when we think of the word protein. Meat is considered a complete source of protein. What do I mean by a complete source of protein? Isn't any source of protein considered a complete source of protein? Well, not really. A complete source of protein includes all 9 of those essential amino acids we discussed earlier. Not all sources of protein contain all 9 of them, and therefore are sources of protein, but not complete sources of protein. Animal-based protein falls under the complete protein category. This includes eggs, cow's milk, Greek yogurt, cheese, and cottage cheese. Great ways to get your protein in during the day are eggs and chicken sausage and a piece of whole wheat toast at breakfast with avocado. You could do a yogurt parfait, or one of my favorite, a cottage cheese bowl for lunch with a healthy fat or carbohydrate. Cheese sticks or cheese cubes with crackers or sliced deli meat. And hard-boiled eggs or egg salad is especially a go-to for me. Feel free to drop your protein options and your favorites in the comments below. Also, for those who measure out meat to get specific serving sizes, be mindful to measure the meat after cooking, as the size decreases when cooking. For example, 4 ounces is actually 3 ounces cooked. Not all protein is animal-based. There are many that are vegetarian and even vegan. Since vegetarian diets are more common now than ever, I want to make sure to cover those options. The first is a complete source of protein and can be included in a vegan diet. That is tofu. Tofu is usually found in the produce area of a grocery store. I see it by the fresh veggies in the grocery stores I go to. Tofu is made from soybeans and can be prepared in a variety of ways. You can scramble it up, put it in the air fryer, marinate it and grill it, bake it in the oven, put it in the steamer. People add it to salads, rice bowls, and even make tofu burger patties. Options are endless. If you have any ways you like to use tofu, please also drop that in the comments below if you would like. There are many more vegetarian protein options than tofu. Tofu is just one that is considered a complete source. Many of the others are not complete sources of protein. I'm a vegetarian and have quite a journey getting in protein without meat, but it is very possible and there are many sources. Now, some vegetarians eat dairy and eggs, some don't. Dairy and eggs are great sources of protein. An egg, depending on the size, can have roughly 7 grams of protein. Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, cow's milk, and cheese, as mentioned earlier, fall into the category of vegetarian protein options for those that include dairy. Greek yogurt can have 12 to 20 grams per serving. That depends on the brand. A serving of cottage cheese is roughly 11 grams, and cow's milk can have around 8 grams. The brand Fairlife has even up to 12 grams, and a single string cheese can have around 6 to 8 grams of protein. Another one we don't think about too often is beans. Using them in ways like refried bean tacos, making meatless chili, doing walking tacos, rice and beans, the English way of beans on toast. Beans can also be a great source of bonus fiber. There are many types of beans and can be used in many ways. There's refried beans, kidney beans, red beans, garbanzo beans, also known as chickpeas, black beans, and more. A serving of beans contains around 6 to 9 grams of protein, depending on the type of bean, and most bean servings are about 1/2 cup. Quinoa is another source of protein, one that I admit I didn't hear of until I was 24. Quinoa is a seed from a plant that can be cooked like a grain, one that I actually thought was rice the first time I saw it. A cup of cooked quinoa has about 8 grams of protein. Lentils are another seed that packs a protein punch. A 1/2 cup serving usually contains about 12 grams of protein. Just be mindful to make sure to wash them before cooking or eating them. You can make lentil soup, bake them on a tray in the oven for a nice crunchy snack, make them into porridge, and even are a good meat substitute, like making lentil burgers. When it comes to protein, there is one hot topic. That is protein powder. Many of you might have tried it or have thought about trying it and adding it into your diet. Many of you, though, may be wondering, with all the kinds and brands out there, what one should I choose? What one is right for me? Now again, everyone is different and has different taste and flavor preferences. And we do not suggest any specific brands. However, there are a few things to look for when you are shopping around for protein powders that we want to talk about just to be mindful of. Protein powder isn't regulated by the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Therefore, it is important to check if protein powder is third-party tested. Third-party tested is when an organization outside of the production and formulation of that product tests the product for quality and safety, an unbiased opinion of the product, so to speak, showing that is what is on the label matches what is in the powder. The protein powder container will have a little label to let you know that it is third-party tested, like the example on the slide. Checking the product label to see if it is third-party tested is a great tip to do when protein powder shopping. A second tip is to make sure it is a complete source of protein. As mentioned earlier, that means it contains all 9 essential amino acids. Animal-based protein powder, like whey protein, will be a complete source of protein. That's not to say other protein powders that are vegan can't be complete sources, but that doesn't mean they all are. So it is great to be mindful and check the label. A third tip is if it contains an added alcohol. Added alcohols usually end in ol, R-O-L. Now, these are not inherently bad, but they can cause bloating, gas, or upset stomach in people. So that is something just to be mindful of. Those are just a few tips when looking into protein powder to use. But now let's answer the question, how can we use protein powder? The first is the most common, and that is we'll look into the types, and that is whey protein. Whey, as mentioned before, is an animal-based protein because it derives from cow's milk. This differs from the second animal-based protein, which is casein, in the fact that whey is faster acting and is more quickly absorbed in the body, whereas casein is slower digesting. So whey is good for post-workout, whereas casein can be better at nighttime to help regulate our blood sugar and keep it more stable over a longer period of time due to it being slower acting. Now, there are some vegetarian and vegan protein powders you can use. The first is soy protein. As the name entails, it is soy-based and comes from soybeans. This can be a great complete source of protein for vegetarians or vegans. Another one is pea protein. This comes from the yellow split peas. They are dried out and then ground into a powder. This can be a good protein option for those that have dairy allergies or sensitivities. It can be good for supporting muscle growth, recovery, and repair. A final common one is hemp protein. This comes from, you guessed it, hemp seeds. It is a great source of omega-3 fatty acids and fiber, and it's also another complete source of protein. Now let's look into ways to use protein powder. And we'll go into the most common one first, a protein shake in the old blender bottle that you may see a lot around the gym or on social media. And it's also pictured here on the slide. It contains water and protein powder, but there are people who like to use milk instead of water. And I personally like to do this because of the different consistency it gives it than using just water. You can also use protein milk like Fairlife to give it a little extra boost in protein. Another way is smoothies. This is one of my favorite as a vegetarian to get in protein. You can pair a good protein powder with fruit, veggie, healthy fat, and a carbohydrate to make a complete meal. Plus, a smoothie is a great on-the-go option, easy to take in the car on road trips, to work, to school, and for those busy times. You can also use protein powder in protein balls. Now, not all protein ball recipes call for protein powder, but some do, and it's a great way to use that protein powder. Adding protein powder into your yogurt, cottage cheese, or oatmeal can be an easy way to get in protein and a bonus for adding that good flavor. Oatmeal with protein powder is an option I love on a cold morning. And I also love to add berries and peanut butter to get fiber and healthy fat. Some people will even add protein powder to their coffee to get some protein. When talking about protein these days, it is also important to mention protein bars, as that, like protein powder, is a big one. Again, we do not suggest any brands, but there are a few tips we just want to mention to help when looking at what protein bars to buy. The first is seed oils. Now, seed oils are not inherently bad, but if you have too much of them, they can cause inflammation. Therefore, if you're eating a certain protein bar quite a bit, it is good to be mindful of any seed oils that it may contain. The second is artificial sweeteners. Just like oils, it's not like you can't have artificial sweeteners and they're bad, but it is smart to be mindful of the protein bar you have has them and how much you're having overall in your daily intake. That being said, another one is sugars. Protein bars contain, making sure that your protein bar doesn't contain too much sugar. Recommendations on how much vary, but roughly 13 or less grams of total sugar is a good tip to start. To wrap up this webinar, I want to make sure to cover protein deficiency and overconsumption. First, let's dive into protein deficiency. Protein deficiency isn't seen too often, so there isn't too much on it, but we want to briefly go over a few signs so you can be mindful. The first is brittle hair and nails. Are hair falling out or thinning more than normal? If you're noticing your hair coming off a lot more on your brush when you brush it every day. With brittle nails, that's nails that are flimsy or weak and break easily. Another sign is fatigue. You feel weak, and things that you do quite often now seem to require more effort and energy, like maybe your regular cleaning work schedule or your regular workout. Proteins are a big piece of what helps keeps our body satisfied and content. This is why if you don't get enough protein or have a deficiency, you can experience extra hunger. You may notice you're more hungry than normal. That being said, extra hunger doesn't necessarily mean automatically you have protein deficiency, but it can be an indicator. Protein can help boost the immune system. As mentioned earlier, they can have the function of antibodies and protect the body. If we are deficient in protein, our immune system can be a little weaker, and therefore we may get sick more often. Without enough protein to help regulate our blood sugar can then bounce around. This can maybe cause us to have trouble thinking and mood changes. Other signs are constant headaches, nausea or upset stomach, and skin ulcers. Those are just a few known common signs. Now onto protein overload or overconsumption. This is less common than protein deficiency, so there is even less on it. However, it is advised that protein intake should not exceed around 35% of total daily energy intake. People with high protein are at more risk for kidney stones. And also, if a lot of the protein you're eating comes from red meat, that person can be at more risk for heart disease or colon cancer. Now on to fun recipes of ways to use protein. The first, as I mentioned earlier, is my favorite, protein smoothies. I have these a couple times a week. My favorite to have with them is a banana. I love having a banana in my smoothie. I also love flax meal seeds. That's one thing I put in all the time in my smoothies. Some people do use chia seeds. They're just not my personal preference, but they're a great fiber source too for protein smoothies. You can use all different types of fruit. People put berries. Some people like to put apples. People will put kale, spinach, even carrots in there. Like I said, I put on the screen, peanut butter is my go-to, but if you're allergic to peanut butter, using some other kind of healthy fat. I know I've used like almond butter before. So very different ways to make them, and you can make them your own. So some people don't like bananas in their smoothies. My sister doesn't, but I do. So it's a great option because you can play around with them. That's what I've done on Pinterest is I've taken bits and pieces from different protein smoothie recipes and kind of figured out what I like and what I don't like from them. So it's great to play around and see what maybe is for you. I also like mine thicker, so I put more ice in. If you don't like yours so thick, just be mindful of how much ice you may be putting in to them. The next is protein banana muffins. I like these as a snack because they're easy to grab and go. If I need to take one and have one at work in between calls, they're great. And a great way to use bananas if you have them around and maybe they get a little too ripe. And also a great way to get in that protein and very filling. So wonderful option to have. And then protein bars our balls are a big one that have been blowing up all over social media that I see. So I did give them a try with needing to get protein in, and they are such a fun snack to have. There's many different recipes. Some include protein powder, like I said before. This one on the screen doesn't. I've tried them with protein powder. So they do taste good with it. It's just this recipe is my go-to that I make all the time for a grab and go snack. And it's my favorite. I use dark chocolate chips because that's my favorite. I tried it before with butterscotch, with milk chocolate, with peppermint during the Christmas time. So really great option to have. I definitely recommend using just hand mixing these though, because I did try them in my KitchenAid blender and they got really crumbly to ball up. So definitely recommend hand mixing protein balls if you're going to make them. And then another thing I want to touch on is kind of maybe a breakfast option to have with it. I love doing cottage cheese or yogurt bowl. You can do Greek yogurt, like I mentioned before in the webinar, depending on what kind of mood you may be in. Obviously, cottage cheese has more of a different texture. And then I love peanut butter. I'm a big peanut butter fan, but if you're not, obviously there's different healthy fats you can use. Almond butter, sunflower, many different types. And then obviously like chia seeds have a different texture. So if you're not a chia seed fan, you can do like flax meal. And then obviously want to touch on some dinner ones too. So I know a lot of people who like to do like salmon bowls because they're an easy, good option to have. You know, have some rice, have some stir-fried veggies that you can throw in the air fryer. You can have those healthy fats by fish like salmon. Tilapia is one that my mom really likes. And then I really like personally as a way to get into that protein at night is refried beans. I do them on whole wheat tortillas or also do them in walking tacos if I'm feeling in a walking taco mood with like Greek yogurt as my sour cream, which is something I've tried recently and really think is really cool and adds a nice little flavor punch. So many different ways to get protein in from snacks to breakfast to dinner. So we discussed a lot during this small amount of time we've had together and a lot of great information. I want to make sure to just summarize and go over a few highlights with everything we discussed. The first is protein is one of the 3 macronutrients our body needs and is made from amino acids. Proteins help with muscle growth and repair, feeling full and satisfied after a meal, and regulating blood sugar, sending signals through our bodies to carry out important functions, and helping with fighting against infections. Protein sources include meat, eggs, dairy products like Greek yogurt, beans, and tofu. Some sources of protein are complete sources of protein where they contain all 9 essential amino acids, and some aren't. Protein requirements vary from person to person. The general guideline is 0.7 grams per 1 pound of body weight. When looking at protein powder, it is good to make sure it is third-party tested, a complete source of protein, and has no added alcohol. Protein overconsumption and deficiency aren't common, but be mindful of your protein intake. I truly appreciate your time and hope you found this webinar helpful. Now we'll turn it back to Shelby for some closing items before we go into questions.
Thank you so much, Libby. Just to confirm here, this should say body weight instead of body fat on this point, because I know there was a question about that earlier. So just want to confirm that. All right, we will stick around for some questions. And I see some have come through, so we'll stick around, but just want to talk about some of the webinars coming up. Next month, we're going to talk about intentional living, which will be a really interesting topic. And then in May, we're going to talk about brain power unleashed. So just things that we can do to help keep our brains in good shape, just like the rest of our bodies. If you have lifestyle rewards points that you can get from watching this webinar, most of you will not, but some of you may have to answer those questions. This will be the questions that you can answer. If you are able to screenshot right now, go ahead and screenshot. Otherwise, these slides will be available to download on our blog post once we get the recording up. And the website for that will be shown on the next slide here. So just hold tight with that. And here's our contact information. We are on social media. We do have the blog that I mentioned. That's where you're going to watch all of the recordings of the webinars. You can register for upcoming webinars, get all sorts of good stuff on our social media and our blog. And if you would like to chat with a health coach specifically, you can give us a call or shoot us an email. You can set up a phone call or you can talk via email. We're more than happy to chat about anything health related.